I have a Minolta MC Tele Rokkor-PF 135mm 2.8 lens here that I'm going to be disassembling. Of the 135mm MC lenses, this is the 2.8 version. There's the 3.5 version also, which I'm going to put over here. So this is the more expensive version of the lens. And you can see, looking at them, the main difference is in the size of the glass on the front. The 2.8 over here has a much larger glass piece, whereas the 3.5 has a pretty large name ring. And there's also some differences externally, like this one has a built-in lens hood, whereas the 3.5 that I have here has just a detachable lens hood that you can screw in place. So there's some other differences, and how they're constructed as well is a little bit different. This one's actually a little bit closer to the MD 2.8 lens rather than the 3.5 MC. So I'm going to be taking this lens fully apart and get access to the aperture blades, get access to the diaphragm, be able to clean the individual body sections, and be able to repair any mechanical problems. The particular copy of the lens that I have here is a little bit beat up, so it has some haze and a little bit of body damage, but that shouldn't affect the disassembly too much. One of the nice features about this lens is how easy it is to get access to the diaphragm. So if there's any oil or anything on the diaphragm, you'd be able to clean that off very easily. So to start off, I'm going to get access to the diaphragm and then go in and take apart the rest of the lens. So here I've extended out the lens hood, and there are two little slotted screws opposite of each other on this metal body section that I'm just going to undo. And now I'm going to unscrew this entire front section here. And this is going to remove both the glass and the lens hood and all this other parts. You can actually see, there we go. So they got the lens hood off there. Oh, and then the glass is up here. And the focusing ring is down in this area, down here. So now I'll just get access to the diaphragm the rest of the way by unscrewing this front glass piece as well. And it has two slots for a spanning wrench, but because I removed this, you can actually grip this whole front section pretty easily and just unscrew this entire section. You can also remove this other, just the black ring up here. There's a bit of adhesive that's in there that prevents it from being easily removed, but if you dissolve that adhesive, you can actually remove that and then go in and clean the inside of these glass elements. Alright, so now I have the front glass piece here and access to the front of the diaphragm. So next I'm going to actually remove the entire diaphragm mechanism. So on this lens, because it's so easy to remove, there's not a lot of benefit to just having access to the front, because you only have to do one extra step to remove the entire mechanism. So I'm going to remove this by undoing these 4 screws going around here in the silver section that is attaching this diaphragm mechanism to the lens. Now I can just lift off this entire diaphragm section, and that's going to take off the back glass as well. So what I have left is the inner shell with the main body section here, focusing all that. And then the diaphragm mechanism here. Let me find the right lever so I can get access to the diaphragm. And the back glass is also attached on this piece. I'm going to just set this body section aside for a moment. And on this diaphragm mechanism, I want to remove this back glass piece. It also has 2 little divots for a spanning wrench here and here. So I'll just use the spanning wrench to undo this back glass piece as well. Okay, so now I have the main diaphragm mechanism. You have access to both sides, and then this back glass piece, all separate. And on this back glass section, you can also undo this top here from the rest of the back glass. Again, it has a little bit of adhesive going around that you have to dissolve, but that actually allows you to get inside this back section of the glass and undo all the different elements in here and clean inside those if there's any fungus or dust. I'm going to set both of these aside. And returning to the main lens body here, next I'm going to actually start going in from the back and remove some of these back elements of the lens body, so the aperture control ring and eventually the ring here with the depth of field scale. To start with, I'm going to lift off this back silver mounting plate, and it's just held in place by 4 screws going around here. So also on the mounting plate, I'm also going to remove this back. Here you can see on this other side here it has the mechanical sections, and then this tube here, which is a plastic tube that just extends into the lens. And just to make the reassembly later easier, I'm going to remove this. It's just held in place by 3 black screws going right there. Okay, so you can see now a little bit better. This is the actual mechanical sections that's coupling the stop-down lever up into the lens. And this is a little bit different than the 3.5 and how it's working. It's kind of actually a simpler design, especially than some of these other lenses like the 200mm. It's very simple compared to that, kind of an extended version of the 55mm lens. So it's got the spring over here. The stop-down lever moves this crescent-shaped piece of metal back and forth, which moves this bar up here, which it eventually couples into the aperture, which I can show a little bit better when we're reassembling it. So set that aside, and now returning to the main lens body here, I have the aperture control ring extending around here, this silver ring, and then the focusing mechanism here. And I'm going to remove the aperture control ring. And there's a little ball bearing over on this side near this post with the numbers and the little grooves in here. So I'm going to be careful not to lose that. And here you can actually see how the aperture control ring is being coupled. It uses these 2 metal bars actually extending up into the lens. Since the aperture mechanism is so far up here, it actually couples it up through the lens in this way. So it's a much better design, less that can go wrong than with some of these other systems for the telephoto lenses. Now I have access to the back section of the lens with the depth of field scale, this black ring going around here. So this one. And I'm going to remove this one as well by just removing these 4 screws going around here. Okay, so now I have this ring separate. You can see the focusing mechanism here and the focusing ring. So this metal section inside is the actual inside of the focusing mechanism. And as I extend this up and down, you can see the intersection move in and out. And this back section as well. And then what's limiting the focusing is this little notch right here, this little screw-like thing. So at the minimum focusing distance, it hits against this side. And at the infinity, it hits against this side. And then at the maximum focusing distance, or minimum in, you hit against this side over here. So it's when it's the furthest extended out that it can be. And now what I'm going to do is remove this focusing ring on the outside of the lens where you actually see. And this is helpful because on these MC type lenses, these little grooves tend to get a lot of debris and things in there. And to actually do that, there are 2 things I need to do. So let me extend this out or in so it's focused as close as it can be, like this. And I'm going to remove this metal ring going around here, which is actually what the aperture mechanism was sitting in. And it's just held in place by 4 screws going around there. Now I can focus back into infinity, and you see a little bit better down into the aperture, into the focusing mechanism here. So this intersection is what moves up and down, this kind of bluish metal section, and then the brass colored section around here is what actually spins around. And I want to detach the focusing ring from the focusing mechanism, and it's just held in place by 4 little screws going around there, down inside the focusing ring. And they also have little washers on each of them. So I'm going to undo this, and the reason I'm undoing this is so I could clean this section. But unless you actually want to clean the focusing mechanism, you shouldn't undo this section, because once you do, you have to focus the lens back to infinity. So when the focusing ring is visibly set to infinity, the lens is optically focused to infinity. So now I've completed the disassembly of the lens. We have the optical pieces over here separate, and you can further disassemble these to actually get inside and clean the individual elements. We have the mechanical pieces, so the diaphragm right here, and the back section that's actually doing the coupling to the diaphragm, and the focusing part, so the focusing mechanism here, and then all the individual body sections, so the lens hood piece and the focusing ring right here, as well as these other ones with like the depth of field scale and the aperture control ring. So you can clean all of those individually. And now I'm going to start on the reassembly. And even though this lens is very simple to take apart, on the reassembly, the only real difficulty is that not everything lines up. There's no clear guides on all the pieces, so you just have to put them together in the right order to make sure you're lining up things correctly. I'll start with the focusing mechanism again here, and you can see on this one that there are actually little marks that were made, I think during the original reassembly, to help line this up. But I'll just go in and set this in here just at an arbitrary position and focus this back to infinity properly later when I have the optics back attached to the lens. So I'm going to go in with these 4 screws going around on the inside brass, or on the inside of the focusing mechanism on this brass ring, and reattach this focusing mechanism just at this position for now. Okay, so with that reattached, I'm going to focus this in, so the center section is as far out as possible, and just reattach this metal ring going here on top of this section. And I don't think the orientation of this really matters, so you can just find the so that these 4 screw holes on the inside line up, and I'll reattach this. Okay, and one of the difficulties I was talking about is that for things like the diaphragm mechanism, it's eventually going to sit down inside here, but it's hard to actually tell without just marking things when you're doing the disassembly where this should line up, because it can rotate completely around. So the way you can actually do that without marking things is to start the reassembly from the back section as well, and that actually gives you a guide for when you're putting together most of these pieces on where things should line up. So on this back section, next I have to reattach the depth, the ring with the depth of field scale. So it's going to sit somewhere. Let me focus to infinity here. Yeah. So this is at infinity when I'm focused, this section is as far in as possible. Now I want to find on here where the depth of field scale is going to mark where it's kind of over at infinity, and I'm going to find where these 4 screw holes going around here line up with the ones inside this ring. And that will kind of allow me to reattach this properly in the right spot. Okay, and before continuing on with the reassembly, check that when I focus to infinity over here, this arrow goes to infinity, it stops, and also at 1.5, so the minimum focusing distance. Next up is the aperture control ring, and the way this you can line up is that the numbers have to go over, so the numbers that are determining the aperture have to go over where the depth of field scale is. And these 2 prongs go like this on the inside here, so that they both go through these holes on either side in here. And the little ball bearing also sits right here. Oftentimes it will be loose, but on this copy I wasn't able to remove it from the lens, so it just stays in that spot. So this should just slide right over this, and then click as it moves back and forth. And while I'm still on this back section here, I might as well attach the focusing or the mounting plate as well. This lines up so that the little lever over here, you can see it kind of goes through on the back side of the lens. It has to go down in this slot over here. So the little lever, you can kind of line it up 90 degrees from this other thing, from where the front of the lens is, and then the 4 screws should line up as well. So it should sit completely flush down inside the lens. Alright, so the entire reason for doing it in this particular order is that we need to get this diaphragm mechanism back into the lens. And to do that, we had to figure out the correct rotation of this, how it's going to sit down in this section here to actually be lined up properly. So now what we have, as you look in through the back of the lens, is these 3 levers, and those are all what are actually coupling the various elements to the diaphragm mechanism. So over on this side up here, we have the stop down lever in the middle section here. So it's moving this bar right here back and forth. The other thing is the aperture control ring, and it's a little bit stiff on this one, so I have some trouble moving it. But it moves these 2 bars on either side, and one of the bars has the 2 little posts here, and the other one doesn't. So the way that this is actually going to sit here, let me get the diaphragm mechanism here. This is how it's kind of going to go into the lens, where it has the posts on either side that rotate together and actually control what the maximum aperture can be. And then this one that actually controls the aperture in the middle is going to go down into where this little thing and the stop down lever over there is. And this is all easier to do at this stage when you can line things up from the back section here. And before I continue on and actually put this piece back in, I do want to reattach this back glass piece as well, so it just screws in place on the diaphragm mechanism. And now I can actually try to properly thread these pieces into place. Okay, so with the lens all the way extended out here, I want to find where it lines up with on the silver ring with one of the screws holes behind it. And I'll just get this started with one. Before continuing on with the rest, I'm going to check that as I go from f22 to 2.8, it fully opens, fully closes, and also when I'm at the minimum aperture, I can hit the stop down lever and open it. So I'll continue on with the rest of these 3 screws going around here on this silver ring. Now I can focus this back in, and I can reattach the front glass section here. So it just screws in place again. And this is actually the stage, this is how you want the lens to look when you would focus it back to infinity. You can see actually that I have access to loosen up the focusing ring screws down inside the lens. And what you would do is you'd mount the lens like this on your camera, loosen these screws up a little bit, or actually get it optically focused to infinity, loosen those screws up a little bit, and then set it so that it is set to infinity on this ring, and then tighten those screws back down so that when it's at infinity on this ring, it's optically focused at infinity as well. But I am going to continue on with the disassembly, or with the reassembly for now. And there's not too many more steps afterwards, so it's really easy to focus back to infinity. Have to reattach the lens hood here. So that is going to slide over this entire mechanism and then screw back into place. And then it locks in place using these 2 slotted screws on opposite sides. So I'm going to tighten these back down so that it can't be easily unscrewed. And finally, on the back section, I have this little black tube that I took out originally to make it a little bit easier to see inside the lens. That's just going to slide back down in there, and it has 3 screws going around there, there, and there that I'll put back in place as well. Okay, so now you can verify that everything is working properly. Again, focusing in and out to infinity and minimum focusing distance. The aperture control ring works, and the stop down lever works as well. This lens is pretty easy to take apart. You can remove just these 2 screws and then this front lens hood and the front glass piece and get access to the diaphragm right away. And in a few more steps, actually remove the entire diaphragm mechanism for cleaning if it has oil or anything on it. For the reassembly, because there aren't always clear guides on how everything should fit back together, it helps to do it in the correct order or actually mark where things were put together in the first place. But it's not too bad overall, and it's much easier than even a lot of the other Minolta telephoto lenses that I've taken apart before. It's much closer to some of the normal length lenses in its construction and its mechanical design. So it's definitely a lens that you can take apart and repair and diagnose any problems with pretty easily.